At the conclusion of our last session, we were talking about the wonderful faculties of order and strength. And I was pointing out that they were a dyad that complement each other. And the strength is our ability to persist in either some physical activity or in the mind. And order is essential to the right use of persistence in that it, either if we're lifting weights, it plants our feet correctly, so we know how to place them. And if we're persisting in some dimension of mind, we have to know what is best in terms of the order of our lives in continuing in that persistence. One of the things that I want to affirm about order in particular today is that the highest use of our order faculty is what we refer to often as divine order. Divine order. And what that merely means is that you have placed your order faculty into the flow of your relationship to the universal intelligence, or of God. And clearly this is something that is something you want to do when you cannot intellectually figure out what is your next step or what is in order for you. And so we have a wonderful word. We say, use divine order. And that's when you turn this sense of order over to God. An example of that would be my life and how when you do this, divine order can work in such wonderful ways. I had, for many years after I'd been in business, I had wanted to leave the business world and to go into the ministry. But I hadn't been able to find one that I really felt totally compatible with. So I had finally sort of given up with the thought of going in the ministry and had gone back to work for Standard & Poor's Corporation as a regional manager for a large part of New England and part of Canada. And I was preparing to go out into the territory and sort of refreshing my mind about things that were happening in the market and the products that we had with Standard & Poor's, when the most successful manager we had knocked on my door and said hello, and I debated whether to invite him to come in or not, because I had heard he was sort of a know-it-all kind of guy. I didn't know him before that. And so anyway, I was trying to do the loving thing, so I said, well, come on in. So he sat down, and right away, sure enough, he was telling me about things I should do when I went out of my territory. And he said to me, you know, you have such a large territory, you just want a place in the middle somewhere you can hang your hat. He said, like a YMCA. And my mind almost immediately rebelled at that thought, though I didn't say that to him. Having been in the Navy in World War II and the Army in the Korean War, I somehow related the YMCA to barrack living, and I didn't need any of that. So I dismissed it. I went out in the territory, and my first week out I looked at several places that had beautiful settings where I might want to call home, and I hadn't seen anything that was right. I was coming back through Beverly, Massachusetts, and as I was sitting at a stoplight right in the center of Beverly, I was thinking to myself, I was born in this town, and I've never been back since I was born here. And as I looked around, I looked across the street, and there was a building, a red brick building, and it said YMCA. I thought, wow, that's interesting. I suddenly had a flash to that conversation, and so I noticed a parking place just waiting for me right on the other side of the crosswalks. So I parked there, went in, I said, do you have private rooms here? And they said, oh, sure. And I said, with private baths? I said, sure. Well, I didn't know this about YMCA, and so anyway, I looked at it. It was very nice and had a nice view, and so I took it. And I also noticed on the table in the lobby there was a little advertisement there for what they said, a Unity class here on Tuesday night. And I thought, Unity, I think that's something to do with the magazine that my mother takes and that she appreciated so much, a very positive thinking publication. So I thought, well, I'll go to that. So I went to the class. A darling little lady ran the class, and I'd never been in anyone like it. She talked about metaphysics, which was new to me, and then she led us in a meditation. I'd never been in a meditation process before. And so I left it, and I told her I enjoyed it and went out the door. That's all I said to her. The next week I came around, made a point of being there for the class again. When I came in, she was not there, but her husband was there. And he welcomed me, and I went over and sat down, and shortly after he came up to me and he said, "Are you the young man who was here last week?" I said, "Yeah, I guess so," because I noticed I was the youngest one in the group the week before. And he said, "Well, my wife said if you showed up, that I was to give you this pamphlet." And he handed me this pamphlet. And it said, "How to Become a Unity Minister." And I thought, I've been looking for a ministry. And I frankly knew nothing about Unity. And so I thought, well, I'll at least take a look at what they have. And so within a week or so, I had made a plane reservation and flew out to their headquarters at Unity Village near Kansas City, Missouri. And I instantly felt at home. And of course, that was the beginning of the 55 years that I've been in the Unity ministry. I've shared a rather lengthy story with you only because I want you to know that there is this capacity that we have through the use of primarily our love faculty, which I'll talk about very shortly, to lift our order faculty into that dimension which we call divine order. When you really request that your life have an order that's beyond what you can intellectually understand, to bring forth what you're persisting in wanting to do. And I was wanting to serve God in some capacity. And I sort of given up the ministry. I thought I'll go out and make a lot of money and do it that way. But in my heart, I wanted to be a minister. And so divine order brought it to me. And it can bring you the right outcomes in your life. If intellectually you cannot see your way, and the doors don't open for you easily, you can shift into that gear and use those wonderful words, divine order. Now, before we leave these two faculties of strength and order, let me tell you where the energy centers of these faculties are located in the body. The strength faculty is where I think you would expect it would be, and that is in the lower portion of the back, where our strongest supporting muscles and structural formations are, the hips and all, in the structure of the saddle of the hips, so to speak, where you give real strength and foundation to your body. Order is just above that in the solar plexus area, and it's very closely near the what we call the belly button in our stomach area. And it's interesting that in the one of the Eastern philosophies, they say that there are 72,000 nerve medians there in that area. 72,000 nerve areas. It is a central switching zone, as it were, to bring order to your entire body. And when I first came across that, it made me think of that old word about somebody sitting and studying their navel. You know, it's so when somebody's in meditation, they say, "Well, he's just studying his navel." Well, there's a lot of truth in that when you realize that being in order is connected to those nerve centers. Well, moving into our next faculties, the faculties of love and wisdom. So far we have had life and renunciation, and then we have strength and order. Now we're going to look at love and wisdom. These two faculties are the master faculties of our entire life. They are the master faculties. It's understandable when you realize that love as an ability, as an idea, is the idea of oneness. It is our ability to think and to act out of oneness. And if there's nothing else you can remember from anything I've shared with you, please remember that. Love is not just a warm, fuzzy feeling that we have toward our family or somebody who looks beautiful or handsome. Love is the idea of at-one-ment. an idea of one-ment. And that then is conveyed into the feeling of at-one-ment. The most central use of that faculty and the best use of it to bring total power and fulfillment into your life is to use power to direct to use the faculty toward your oneness with God. To direct it toward your oneness with God. You know, when the rich young ruler asked Jesus, what was the great commandments? And Jesus said, to love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. The first commandment that most of us know quite well. And the second is like unto it, to love yourself and your neighbor, or to love your neighbor as yourself. But the first part is what I want to affirm so strongly, that love is the idea of at-one-ment with God. When you love God and have a sense of at-one-ment with God, you open yourself to the connection with God that allows God to move and to act into your life. This is why Jesus gave us that commandment. It wasn't because, as I think we sometimes get out of religion, that God insists that you love Him. So if you want to be on God's good side, you've got to keep the first commandment and to love God with all your heart and soul and mind. No, Jesus understood that if you want to gain access to God's support and help and power in your life, you want to love God with all your heart and soul and mind. Not just casually, like, do you love God? Oh yeah, sure I love God. I mean, after all, He created the universe. No, I'm talking about a love that makes you want to greet your day with a sense of, thank you, God, for this day. I love you. And close your day in that same spirit. When you have that kind of relationship of at-one-ment with God, you have opened tremendous doors of good in your life and given the God activity ability to support all your other faculties. Just like when I talked about the order faculty, and I said, if you lift that to its highest use, you call it divine order. Well, you can have divine order when you've made that love connection with God. Love, as the idea of at-one-ment, is power not just in our relationship to God, but with everything in our life. You know, and I want to emphasize, we're talking about power. It gives you real power. I'll give you an analogy of this. Not an analogy, I'll give you an example again out of my own life. Some years back, Dorothy and I were doing retreats. My wife Dorothy and I were doing retreats in Hawaii. We were trying to think of who we were going to have as a lecturer for that retreat. And we just happened on television about that time to see a scientist from IBM talking about having taught children how to bend spoons. And we thought, wow, that's unusual. And so this gentleman was a very well-known scientist, and I contacted him and asked if he'd be interested in coming over and lecturing to a group of us who were doing a retreat in Hawaii. That's a rather nice invitation, and so he accepted. And we had him as our lecturer. And in the process, he one day told us that he was going to share with us what he had shared on television with children. This is anybody could do it. Children tend to do it better sometimes than adults, because you have to really believe in what you're doing here. So he had us all spoons. We had arranged and had spoons given to us. Somehow I ended up with this spoon, which is a Navy weight spoon. And he said, now you take the spoon in your hand, and you take the handle of the spoon, and you begin to rub it between your fingers, just gently, and you begin to think into the spoon. With your mind, you just go into the spoon as if you were one with the spoon. And as you keep rubbing it, he said, and you do that, you will feel it getting warm under your fingers. And so I was doing that, and putting myself totally into it, and suddenly I was pleased to feel the spoon was beginning to feel warm. And he says, when you feel it has been warm for a little while, he says, then just take the spoon handle and just begin to turn it like a corkscrew. He said, you don't have to do it hard. If you've done it right, it'll just be soft. And so I did it with this one, folks. And as I say, this is not your ordinary little kitchen spoon. This is heavy. I can't even move it now, you know? And so the reason I share that with you is what we were doing was using the power of love. And it probably seems millions of miles from what you think of when you think about loving your children or even loving God. But love is a power. You see, all mind moves energy. And everything in the universe is only energy. Your body is only energy. The spoon is only energy. And all the physicists in the world agree with that. They may not agree with bending spoons. As a matter of fact, if you said to the average PhD, at least 90% of them would probably say, oh, come on, I'd have to see that to believe it. But on the other hand, if you said to them, well, what's the spoon made up of? And they said, well, essentially it's energy, that's all. It's slowed down energy. That's what physical matter is, slowed down energy. So, the reason that love can allow that spoon to become soft and to be moved is because you go into it and claiming it, one with it at the energy level, and then it just lets you do that folding process. Well, it's one thing to talk about doing it with spoons. It's another thing to talking about, say, going into a situation where you have people who don't like you, indeed hate you, and decide how are you going to deal with that. I remember a story that Judy Scutch, who is the publisher of the well-known metaphysical work, the well-known, I can't think of it now, but it's a Course in Miracles, A Course in Miracles. And Judy told a story. I once, just by chance, it didn't happen to her very often, she was riding a subway in New York City very late at night. And there were 3 African-American boys there, and they kept looking at her. And of course her mind ran to all sorts of possibilities, because she's all alone there, and she had her purse right there. And she said suddenly one of them got up and started walking to her, and she looked up at him and she just thought, what shall I do? And she said, I love him. So when he got close to her, she said, I love you. And he looked back at her for a moment, sort of stunned, and he said, I love you. And he turned around and went back and sat down. In any event, that's a very little small analogy of this, but love is a power that works everywhere. We'll pick up on this again next session.